Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we're going to talk about agility. We're going to talk about transformation. We're going to talk about how to connect more effectively with your customers. We have a wonderful guest here. Jeff Gothelf is from Barcelona, Spain, is where he is right now, in beautiful Barcelona. And he is the author of the book, Sense and Respond, as well. He's got many other books that he's written as well on this topic. And he helps organizations build better products and helps executives build the cultures that build better products. And so he's actually a co-author also of the book, which is an award-winning book, Lean UX. You can see that behind if you're watching on video. It's behind him there. And as I said, Sense and Respond. He's a coach, he's a consultant, he's a keynote speaker, and he helps companies bridge the gaps between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. So Jeff, welcome to Leaders of Transformation. We're excited that you're here today.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for having me. It sounds so cool to hear you say all those things about me. I feel so accomplished when I hear you say those things.
Don't you love it when people interview you, and they introduce you and you're like, wow, who is that person? I want to hear that person. Well, the reality is you have accomplished much. And when I read your book, I was so impressed. This was one of those books that I was like, wow, I can see myself recommending this to my clients, recommending this to business leaders that I work with. Is really, really profound. Now, before we go any further, I always like to acknowledge the people that support our podcast, and certainly that is our listeners and our viewers, and it's also the booking agents that send us amazing guests. So Rebecca at the Talent Squad, thank you for connecting me to Jeff and helping us to make this interview happen. I know we rescheduled a couple of times, but here we are, and everything happens in perfect timing. So again, thank you to Rebecca and the Talent Squad. So Jeff, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're passionate about.
Absolutely. It's interesting. The evolution of my career has surprised me, but the work that I do has maintained consistency. It's just that the target audience has shifted and the scope of the work has shifted over time. So I started off, so I've been working professionally for 20 years. I got a little bit of a late start because I tried to be a rock star for a couple of years. I was a touring musician very, very briefly. That failed. But we gave it a real shot, which was fun. And I started my career as a designer.
You didn't have the hair? Is that what it was?
I did have the hair.
Oh, did you? Oh, wow.
You have to look at old photos I can show you. But at the time, I did have the hair. Today, sadly, not so much. But yes, I was down to here. It was beautiful and wavy. And
wow.
Sadly, it's long gone. But I started working professionally as a designer. I was designing software products, and this was during the .com 1.0, Web 1.0 days. And I spent a decade doing that and working through, building, kind of clawing my way up to middle management, design management, basically, and trying to build really great products and design great digital products for a variety of companies and agencies and clients over the years. 10 years ago or so, I hit an inflection point. Everything kind of converged at the same time. I was tired of doing what I was doing because there was a level of waste to the design work that I was doing that I was not willing to tolerate anymore. So we would be designing in these black boxes, and then we'd hand all that work over to software engineering and wait for them to develop it. Now, on a good day, half of my design work got implemented. And that was a good day. That meant that on a good day, half of my work got thrown away. And that was a good day. Usually it was more than that. And I was not willing to tolerate that for another decade or so. I had to figure out what to do. At the same time that that's happening, Agile is starting to really catch on. It's been around for about a decade, but really started to catch on as the modern project management method. And the challenges that designers were having was, hey, how do we do design in an Agile environment? And I was lucky enough to be in a position where I had the opportunity to experiment with trying to find an answer to that. And we did. The team I was working with and some other colleagues, we found an answer to it, and which ultimately became the book Lean UX. Now, Lean UX became very popular because it provided an answer to this very big question that many, not just designers, but organizations trying to build cross-functional teams that build customer-centric products and services were struggling with. And what people started asking me to do changed fundamentally. It changed from, hey, Jeff designed the software, to, we read your book and we get it, but we're struggling to make it happen. Can you come in and help us? And so I started doing that. And I've been teaching, coaching, and consulting Lean UX ever since then. But what's fascinating is after about 5 years of doing that, the feedback has became consistent. And it said, okay, Jeff, we get it. We understand what to do. We're trying to do it, but I keep bumping up against my boss, or our culture, or the way that my company runs does not support this way of working, this cross-functional, customer-centric, evidence-based, agile way of working. And to me and my co-author, Josh Seiden, this smelled like an opportunity. And so we took all that feedback and everything that we had learned getting these ideas into organizations, and we wrote a book called Sense and Respond, which you talked about at the beginning of the show. And that is a business book. And it's a business book designed for executives, leaders, and aspiring leaders to explain to them really what digital transformation is all about. And perhaps even more importantly, not what agile is about, because there's not really a whole lot of mention of agile in the book, but what agility is about. What does it mean to be an agile, lowercase a organization that embodies agility? And that's really what motivates me today. Is I work with product development teams, with executives. Yesterday, I spent the day with teams at a large German telco, working with their HR teams, with their finance teams, with their strategy teams, to really get them to embody this idea of agility that transcends departments, right? So if agile came out of IT, agility transcends all departments, and that's what I do today. And it's super challenging and really hard, and a ton of fun when we get it right. So it really works. It's exciting when it starts to work.
So when you talk about it being hard, is that because of the ingrained beliefs and habits that leaders have within organizations?
Absolutely. This is exactly what we're fighting. 100 years of manufacturing management processes, theories, and methods. That historical inertia is what we're pushing against. It's what people have been taught in business school. It's how especially large legacy corporations have been built. The incentive structures within those organizations mirror those management practices, and rewiring the culture of these companies. It's a daunting task because it fundamentally, so at its core, what we're asking people to do is to stop telling their teams what to do. Right? Specifically, right? Instead of saying, top-down manufacturing mentality, right? This command and control model that you've heard about is the boss has all the answers.
Right.
The boss knows best. The boss tells the team very specifically what to do, how to do it, and when to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Now, in manufacturing, that makes sense because at the end of the day, you know exactly what you're making. You know what it's going to look like. You know how much material goes into everything, and you have a pretty good guess what people are going to do with it. And so that's a low risk, high certainty situation where you can, there's not a lot of room for creativity, right? We want to maximize efficiency, profit margins, that kind of thing. With knowledge work, we're not building static units. We're building systems. We're building systems that continuously evolve and have to react to changing customer expectations. And our customer expectations are being regularly impacted by the digital products and services they use every day. So you may work in a B2B situation. Let's say you're in commercial banking, right? And you'll say, well, how does people using Facebook or Airbnb or Netflix affect me? Well, those are the expectations people have about what it means to transact with an organization today, right? The way that I interact with Amazon, I expect that to be the way I interact with every organization, with my bank, with my doctor, with my insurance company. And so we have got to start thinking like a software company, and software companies that succeed don't measure success based on the deployment of a feature. because software companies like Amazon and Facebook and Netflix, they deploy features all day long, right? It's a non-event. It's nothing to celebrate. They measure success in terms of outcomes, changes in customer behavior. And everything hinges on that, on leadership letting go, setting strategic direction, setting goals. The goals are we want customers to behave in these specific ways, and then letting the teams make the decisions on an ongoing basis. And that's where the agility comes from. But it's super difficult because, again, there's 100 years of books, telling us to do the exact opposite.
Yeah. Well, and with that, one of the things that I appreciated you really unpacking your book is this idea that it's not about you trying to guess what your customers want. And that's been taught for years, where you're supposed to figure this out. You're supposed to, work with your team and figure out, look at market trends and decide what the market wants and then deliver it and say like, ta-da, this is it. And you take it, so there's that lean startup model, but then you're taking it another level of really inviting the customers into the conversation along the whole way. So can you talk a little bit about that approach to it, and how people who are entrepreneurs and business owners who are listening, how can they apply that in what they're doing?
Yeah. So don't get me wrong. If you know your domain, if you know your market, if you know your customers, right, you should, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, you should have a strong opinion about how to deliver value to your customers. Right? Whatever it is that you provide them, you should have a strong opinion about that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't study trends and emerging technologies and behavior patterns and then make a decision about how you'd like to proceed. What I'm saying is that you treat that decision, that strong opinion, as a hypothesis, right? Rather than a requirement. That's the fundamental difference. And to be clear, the quality that I'm asking you to practice here, I guess it's quality is the right word here, is humility. Right? Humility simply is, and this is where leaders always get this wrong, and this is why this is, again, kind of a big struggle here, humility is not the abdication of vision or leadership or direction. Humility is simply saying, I have a strong opinion about this thing because I'm an expert, I've got experience, so okay. But if the evidence from the market that we collect as a team, as an organization, contradicts my strong opinion, I'm willing to change my mind. That's it. That's humility. And so if you take that strong opinion about how to best to deliver value to your customer base and succeed in your marketplace as a hypothesis, then you put the challenge to your team to then validate or invalidate that hypothesis as quickly as possible with evidence from the market. We want to get customer feedback as quickly as possible that tells us that this hypothesis has legs or that it doesn't. Because if it doesn't, we don't want to spend any more time on it than we have to. And we want to move on to a better version of it or to the next one. And so the sooner that we can get ideas into the hands of our customers, really the lightest weight things, the smallest things that we can make to get some kind of market feedback, the sooner we start to get a sense of whether there's a there. And then we can decide what to do about that information. So it's funny, I'll give you an example. So yesterday, this is from my work. So I was working with this telco yesterday, and I was working with the human resources team. And one of the things that this was the kind of the acquisition and retention side, not the learning and development side. And one of the things that they're thinking about is vacation policy. And so they've got this big idea about how to implement vacation policy, and they're going to impact 8,000 people with that decision. Now they've got a sense of why it's good and how people will react to it and what it will mean for the employee behavior. Right? They'll take more vacation, they'll be more rested, they'll recommend it to a friend, they'll get better resumes submitted to them, right? And I said, well, how do you know it's going to work? And they said, well, we're experts at this, so it's got to work. Well, not necessarily, right? What happens if you're wrong? Well, if we're wrong, then we might see a large churn in the employee, in the staff. It's like, that's a problem, right? So let's test that idea, right? So instead of testing this idea on 8,000 people, let's write up a memo, right, that describes the new vacation policy and give it to 10 people and say, hey, this is going to be the new vacation policy. What do you think? Right? And just get their reaction, right? So anything you can do to bring the customer into the conversation. And again, I use the word customer here, but you'd be like, well, employees aren't customers, Jeff. Well, they're the customers of the HR department, right? They are the people who consume the product or the service from HR. So anyone who consumes your product is your customer in my mind. And so let's put something in their hands and see how they react as quickly as we can.
Now, of course, that suggests also that those 10 people, you've created a culture of feedback where they're actually comfortable giving feedback rather than saying, oh, yeah, that sounds good. Or you get no response, which happens a lot, where you just, people don't say anything and you're like, I put this out there and nobody had any comments. So what I'm hearing is right from the top down, you have to create a culture in order for that to work internally and externally, that feedback is welcome in the organization, which is not usually the case.
Right. No, it's not. So the culture that you're trying to create as a leader of an organization, of a continuously learning organization, right, a sense and respond organization, as we call it, right, is a culture where I feel safe as someone who works for you. I feel safe standing up in front of my team, my boss's boss, and saying the words, I was wrong. And if we're not wrong about that, if we're not comfortable doing that, then we're never going to build that feedback loop, that learning culture, that the agility into the organization. Because to be clear, right? So if you build that culture of learning, and I feel comfortable going out and doing the discovery work, the learning work, and I learn that I get some evidence from the market that contradicts our plan, our strategy, our direction, then we're going to change course based on that evidence. That's agility. That's being agile, right? It's responding to change based on evidence from the marketplace. If I don't feel comfortable, if I don't feel safe, if I think I'm going to get fired or reprimanded or demoted for contradicting the plan or the boss, I'm never going to do that learning work. And we're just going to follow your plan and hope that it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about the speed of change. It's moving, everything's moving so fast these days. And so even as you're getting feedback, that feedback, I mean, things change. And so it's like, how often do you hear somebody's like, well, we did a customer survey and this is what the customer survey said. And, you know, now we're a year or two down the road and we just assume that that's the same information, but things have changed so fast. So talk about that.
Yeah. So the pace of change is a double-edged sword. It's a competitive threat to you, and it's a competitive advantage. So it just depends on how you treat it, but it is actually both. So I'll give you a statistic, and I've been using this statistic forever, which means that this statistic is probably the number is even more impressive today than when I researched it a few years ago. So, but it was impressive back then. Amazon, okay. Amazon is always a good example for this kind of stuff. Amazon pushes code to production every 11.6 seconds. Pushing code to production means that a real Amazon customer gets a change to the way that the system works, the way that the Amazon works 5 times a minute. Some customer in the world gets a change to the system 5 times a minute.
Wow.
It's insane. It's literally like almost unfathomable. And that's an old statistic, which means that today that number is probably even lower. It's probably 10 times a minute. Now, what that means is that they are continuously testing and learning and improving the way that Amazon works, right? Every one of those shipments, right, 5 times a minute is a learning opportunity for them. And so the pace of change is that fast, right? There used to be, I don't know if you remember this, a few years ago, there used to be, every time Facebook would change their interface, they would spin up these groups. People would get really mad. and it'd be like 1 million people against the Facebook redesign. I don't know if you remember that. That was not more than 5 years ago, right? There would be all these groups that would spin up on Facebook. You don't see those anymore today. You don't see them because Facebook redesigns 50 times a day. And so there's no time to spin up 1 million people to protest it before it changes again. That's the pace of change that we're talking about. And so the organizations that move that fast, that can react to customer feedback that fast, that can learn and evolve, are your competitive threats. The faster you can learn, right? The faster your competition is learning, the more threatening they are to you as competition because they can improve their service more quickly. But
well, that's
you can
daunting. That's daunting to an entrepreneur or a solo entrepreneur, which we have a lot of, people that have become entrepreneurs in the last 10 years alone.
Yeah.
That are, how do you keep up with that?
Yeah. So the beautiful thing is that you can also use that, right? So the same technologies that they use, that the big players use, is available to you. You've got the ability. Look, I'm a solopreneur, right? And I became one in the last 10 years. I use technology to test and learn, to experiment, to sense and respond on my ideas all the time, right? For example, I've got a Twitter account with 40,000 followers, right? I test my ideas on there all day long. I have an epiphanous shower moment, and I'll come running out and I'll tweet an idea, and I'll come back an hour later and see if anybody liked it, retweeted it, responded, that type of thing. That's a feedback loop. I have a blog that has several thousand readers every week, right? I'll put something up there and see what happens. I've got a mailing list that goes out once a month. If I've got new events, I sell a lot of events, live events, online events, that type of thing where, I do trainings and that kind of thing. Before we commit to any kind of real effort, building a class, designing a class, offering a training, I'll put up a page on my blog that offers the class with a price point, and I'll see if people buy tickets. Right. So
so you don't actually create the class until there's demand for it. Yeah.
No. I mean, why do the work if no one buys the ticket?
Yeah.
Right. If people buy the tickets, sure, I'll write the class. I know what I write the class description, so I know the value proposition is there, right? The price point is there, and so I'm validating my business model. And then if people buy tickets, then we go and write the class.
Yeah.
And if not enough people, I refund the 2 or 3 people who bought the tickets, and I kill the page, and I try to learn why it didn't resonate, and then we try again.
Yeah.
And so the tools are there for all of us to use. We just have to understand that how to use them, and to draw inspiration from the big guys, because that is like I said, it's a competitive threat and an advantage to us at the same time.
Well, what's interesting is you talk about social media, blogs, testing out your products and so forth. That also goes against the old model. So we talk about humility, and you talk about the courage to receive feedback. Goes against the old model of, I don't want to put it out there and mess up my audience. It's got to be perfect. Mm-hmm. It's got to be the ta-da when I put it out there. I've been in business long enough that's how, it was, right? It was like, you did not want to put it out there unless it was like perfect, but talk about the customer, the consumer, and how they perceive that, the new way of doing things, right? So let's say they see something from you. Let's say your audience sees a class that you put up, and they're like, what is that Jeff's doing? I mean, obviously you don't want to be completely off in left field, but it doesn't resonate, right? Now they probably look at it differently now than they would 20 years ago, or 10 years, even 15 years ago. So can you talk a little bit about how the consumer, in their experience with Amazon and Facebook and like I said, solopreneurs like yourself and myself, how they're actually approaching it differently?
So it's funny you were talking about this, and it reminded me, when I first started my career and I was a designer, we actually, the first few years of work, we actually called the style of design we were doing, we called it ta-da design, right? Literally, because we would disappear behind our giant monitors for 3 months, or if we were lucky, 3 weeks. If we weren't, you know, and then appear, right, with our design. Ta-da, we did it. There it is. Isn't it beautiful? Don't you love it? And like I told you, 75% of it would end up on the cutting room floor. So no, they didn't love it. What we've learned to do, what we had to learn to do as designers back then, was to get comfortable showing rough sketches, right? And those rough sketches allowed us to get the feedback that we were seeking and the buy-in from the people that we were seeking it from, because now they had a part, they were kind of co-creating it with us, and so they were more invested in it. So those are your colleagues at work. Now, from a customer perspective, these days, they're expecting to be able to give you feedback. They're expecting to vote with their visits, their eyeballs, their dollars, their time. And what I've learned is they will forgive you for less than perfect experiences that deliver value and that ultimately continuously improve based on their feedback, because, oh, they heard me, right? I gave them that, they made that change because they got my complaint, right? And so there's that buy-in there that goes a long way. I'll also caveat this by saying that we can work quickly and get ideas out into the market quickly with very little investment that don't suck, that aren't crappy. Now they might not be complete. They might have broken links or broken experiences, but the presentation of those ideas can be top-notch and on brand, because you've got those assets, you've got those elements, you know how to, like, you know, for example, right, putting up a new event page on my blog, I use the same theme I always use. I've got my branding, I've got my colors, I've got my headshot, I've got my, you know, my
So the
style of writing.
presentation is the quality,
right?
Yeah, you still have that quality. You're not shortcutting on that.
Exactly, and you have all that stuff already. And so even if it's an experiment, it doesn't have to look like one, and it doesn't have to suck. Like it can look legit. And so I want to stress that, because a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to I have a brand to protect. Protect the brand. You know, just use your brand assets to make it look legit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I know that you got to go take your daughters. You've got some family stuff coming up, so
yeah.
We'll wrap it up here. But one last, just really quickly before we do, I would love to hear I'm putting you on the spot here, so hopefully something will come up quickly. But what's a story? What's one of your favorite stories of a transformation of somebody that you've worked with, where you can see this kind of like night and day, or, you know, this major improvement by implementing this sense and respond, this model that you're teaching?
Sure. It's a case study in the book, and I still hold it up as one of the clients that we've worked with, and have continued down this path in a very, very impressive way. The client is Auto Trader UK. So if you're familiar with autotrader.com in the US, it's a different company that started off doing exactly the same thing as autotrader.com in the US, and they've since evolved into a bunch of adjacent markets, all kinds of services for dealers and buyers and of used cars. They're a 40-year-old company, and for 25, maybe even 30 of those 40 years, they were a print-only company. And then they built a website, and then they began to expand and become more successful. And when we joined them on talking about the sense and response stuff and consulting with them, they were deploying software 4 times a year. 4 times a year means that they were learning 4 times a year. Now remember, Amazon's shipping 5 times a minute. So they're learning 5 times a minute. They're learning, Auditor's learning 4 times a year. As we started to work with them, they began to increase the pace of delivery of ideas into market. They started to build this continuous delivery model, this continuous learning, continuous improvement model, this model of agility, right? Digitally transforming their business from a print base. Because remember, print has this finite deliverable, right? At some point, we have to go make the paper, right? Yeah. And if you've got 30 years of that historical inertia, if you're printing it online, that mentality doesn't go away. It still feels like we have to print it online and that's it and we're done for the day. We can't do it, right? So transforming the culture to say, you can do this multiple times a day, as many as you'd like, and then begin and use that as a learning opportunity. And not only did that change how they think about their work and their culture, but how they staff. So building cross-functional teams that work this way, and how they incentivize their teams, right? So no longer was the incentive launch search, right? Or launch photo uploads as the feature, but the incentive was ensure that a customer can get a for sale listing up in 2 minutes or less, which is an outcome. It's a measure of customer behavior. How do you do that? Well, they have to go figure that out and learn the best way to do that. And to this day, they're continuing to evolve, and they're a monopoly at this point. They've got over 85% market share in the UK for used car advertisements and a variety of other services. I'm super proud of them for the work that they've been doing.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, thank you so very much for spending a few minutes today. I appreciate you and appreciate your information. I would encourage our listeners and our viewers to go get a copy of Jeff's book, both his books, in particular, the one we've been talking a lot about here, Sense and Respond. That is available. There's 2 websites I'm going to give you, jeffgothelf.com, and we'll make sure the link is in the show notes, so you can access that. And also senseandrespondpress.com is another site where you can learn a little bit more about what Jeff's doing. But I encourage you to go do that, because that book is excellent. There's so much value packed into that, whether you are a leader of a major multinational organization or whether or not you are a solopreneur, it's relevant to you. So I encourage you that. Leaders of Transformation take action. So go get a copy of Jeff's book, learn more about what he's doing and how this can apply to you, how you can increase the speed of change and adaptation, agility in your business, and be able to connect more effectively with your customers and create the transformation that you deserve to be able to create. So we'd love to hear your stories. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com. You can go, of course, find us on social media. We'd love to hear what you're up to. And any questions and comments, please let us know as well. We'd love to hear your feedback. And we appreciate you, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.